it's Gitanjali here from High Definition U, and today I am joined by Michael Cornacchio, who is currently in New York working with AIG. Michael started his role on the graduate program back in 2014, so let me get that right, 6 years ago. Still within the engineering area, and he started as a product manager. He has now been promoted into a management role, Global Property Product Manager, and he works within general insurance. He's known really in the business as someone who can come in and create an incredible tech platform, obviously with the team, taking some of that engineering prowess that he has and evolving, shall we say, from the stone and chisel style approach to something which was really incredibly innovative. And now I understand they're going to be picking up in underwriting as well. He's got a lot to share with us today because he's been on both sides, starting in an early career position, but also now looking at it from a management perspective at some of the topics which we're going to be looking at today around feedback and my other favorite F word, failure. But before we begin, so welcome, Michael, before we get into failure, it's always really, really important to celebrate and get our brains to create some really lovely neural pathways around that. So let me ask you, what are you celebrating right now, Michael?
I have to say, firstly, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk to the team. I'm going to steal that as my elevator pitch. You know, everything you just said is like a brilliant 60 seconds. So that did a better job than I ever could. Something to celebrate. Well, a few things in these trying times, of course. I think, we just crossed half a year of married life, so that's always exciting.
Yeah.
And we're looking to purchase a home, so that's exciting. You know, these 6 years into your career, you get excited about the next steps and phases. I'm celebrating a new role, as you pointed out, so it's relatively new for me in terms of where I am in the org, and very exciting times, and it's certainly helping with all the things in the world right now to be this occupied. You know, it's certainly very helpful.
And when we were looking at that kind of role that's emerged and evolved for you, you know, there's lots of things that you're good at, of course. I wonder if I asked you, what are you an expert at? What would you say? Because 6 years in, you know, you're starting to understand that. And how would you answer that? What are you an expert at, Michael?
Well, I'd love to say I'm an expert of none, but a knowledge on everything, right? But that's never a good answer, right? So I think the one thing that this role has really forced me to do and to be good at is gaining consensus, right? So that requirement of consensus amongst different players in the organization is really, honestly, a giant feedback loop, right? And it's going to be a good segue, I think, into the topics we're going to talk to today. But trying to gather feedback from a variety of different people, the line underwriters, the field engineers, the modelers, trying to get them to all see the big picture and work in the same space to understand what it is we need to accomplish from both the process and the technology perspective, right? So it's incredibly challenging sometimes, but you get good at it and you figure out what people want to hear and you figure out what people don't want to hear as part of that kind of the enormous feedback loop.
Yeah, and that influencing piece, as you say, when you don't necessarily have that direct management in that kind of project way of being. I'd love to take a step back, actually, and before we dive into that idea of feedback and failure, you know, it is related to failure, I guess, in a way. You know, the insurance industry has been through a pretty big evolution itself. I wonder if we took a step back and thinking about what you do, how would your parents describe what you do?
Oh, that's a good question. They probably would look at me with a stunned face and say, I have no idea. When I first started this job out of college, they would probably say, okay, he was an engineer. So he would go, and an engineer in this industry is largely working to make sure something's insurable, right? So we're going to look at a large industrial complex. We're going to look at a large manufacturing plant. We're going to say, okay, will it burn to the ground? Will it not burn to the ground, right? That's probably how they would put it, at least. Now, I think for me, it's like managed technology product development. on behalf of the different units within property. So what would they say? They would say he uses computers.
He uses computers all day. I love it.
That's probably what they'd say.
I love it. And what kind of myths, or what's a common myth about insurance that you want to debunk?
It's not that complex. And everybody thinks insurance is like this really like diverse concept, and it's complex and difficult to understand. And if you really dive in, it is, because there's so many different facets of insurance. But insurance touches everything in our lives, really, if you think about it. And it's not that complex at its core, right? I think there's a really good insurance 101 that I used to love to give to incoming engineers into the analyst program, because I just picture it as like a cake, and everybody takes different layers of the cake until the entire cake is gone. And that cake is what the insured needs to put out to the market as insurance, right? Like, everybody takes a little slice of the pie until everything is gone, right? Until everything's insured. So it's not that complex, and people can learn it if they put their heads to it.
I mean, there are certainly challenges, I'm sure, that you've experienced in the last 6 years. And I wonder, when you think about those, what you would describe as your biggest failure, and of course, what you learned from that.
Yes, failure. Not infrequent in a large organization. So I think what is my biggest failure would probably be, there was a promotion opportunity early in my career, probably about 3 years in, and definitely thought I was up for it. And I thought I was a qualified candidate. Of course, I was only 3 years in. It was kind of like a middle line manager, and I didn't get it. So to me, that was a personal failure, right? It's just like, what did I do not to get that position, right? And what did I learn from it? We'll probably get into this, right? But like, failure is not just your interpretation of failure, right? Everybody has their own understanding of failure. And I didn't fail the organization by not getting that position, right? I didn't fail somebody else. Somebody was more qualified or better at the position than I would have been. So I define that as failure, but that's not necessarily the objective term of failure, right? And it was just learning that, there's a lot you could take away from that type of experience that isn't necessarily what to do better next time. It can also be, why did you fail? Was it even really failure, right? And then how do you recover for the next opportunity, which there are plenty. There are so many. I
love that. I love that idea that there isn't always something that you need to change about yourself through that process, about what would I do differently, or what do I need to do differently. It's reframing, actually, was it a failure? And, I guess along those lines, how would you differentiate between that? How would you define failure versus feedback?
Oh, that's an awesome question. I think failure is so much easier to put an objective to, right? So failure to me is not meeting a desired or intended objective, right? It oftentimes is black and white. It's not always, but oftentimes is black and white. There's a goal. Did you accomplish it or did you not, right? There are different degrees of failure, though. And I think the core question of failure is, who have you failed? Is it yourself? Is it a family member or a coworker? Is it the organization? Which has different degrees of, I think the extent of that failure differs depending on who it is you, quote, failed. And so you're going to experience what you may say is failure 100 times in a given day, week, month. It may not be failures to other people, right? So, I mean, and they may have no effect on the organization. They may be personal failures. So, to me, it's kind of individual first, and that's, we're very hard on ourselves. Feedback is other people usually, or being hard on yourself, right? Or you being hard on someone else in a way. And how do you deliver that? How do you provide that in a constructive, meaningful, powerful way? Feedback is usually a response mechanism to the observation of failure, at least in my perspective. Um, so I think there's some things that come from feedback that are based on failure, but not necessarily one and the same.
Yeah, that's good. So it's actually a response mechanism to that failure. And actually within that, there's an opportunity to seek out feedback even. And perhaps you did that, you know, when you didn't get the promotion and you were experiencing that personal failure.
Oh, heck yeah.
And seeking out feedback and differentiating between the two. Because for me, in a lot of the work that I do, it's about saying, how do we move from that culture really, right, of failure to actually, is it really just feedback and what's in there to learn? So I imagine you sought out feedback. Can you tell us anything about how you got feedback through that process of what you considered initially as a failure?
Well, and I think what you said is like really important too, in that, you know, there's something, trying to sort out the difference between feedback and failure is so key, right? Just because somebody provides you feedback doesn't mean you failed. It means there's something that you could have done better, perhaps. And so that's where your own definition of failure is going to really come into play, black and white, right? As a matter of fact, as part of that process is actually a direct conversation with the manager that, you know, interviewed me, and, well, okay, why didn't I get this position, right? And at first you're so defensive. It's, you know, you've got this little chimp in your head that's screaming and reactive and saying, oh my God, this is terrible. I deserved this. This person's not qualified, et cetera, et cetera. That's not true. Once you really rationalize that and quell that chimp, you throw a couple bananas at it and say, go away. You're in timeout zone. And so, you know, once the human starts to really interpret the information and say, okay, really, what can I do better? More experience, more qualification, more outreach within the org, right? For that position to have really applied for me. So I think that soliciting feedback is a powerful way, and even giving yourself feedback if you really want to go to that extent. Soliciting feedback is a powerful way to interpret failure.
And it's easy enough, you know, for us to talk about it now, right, in the rational light of day, and you've got perspective and you're going back and you're thinking about it. Because as you say, the emotions and the defensiveness, and people react differently in those situations. So I wonder if you could just get in that time machine, Michael, and zip back to the beginning of your career and be able
to
zip
back motion,
those worlds, and just actually, you know, get concise with yourself and give yourself those really 3 top tips around feedback. What would you say to Michael of 60?
I love it. Manage your initial response. You know, again, it kind of goes back to that like chimp and human concept, right? It's like just irrational, the thing in your head that's screaming and yelling. So manage that initial response before you respond. Play it out. Empathize. So realize the other person's position. It's not all about you, as much as you want it to be. And it's a human reaction, but empathize. And then engage in a real self-assessment, right? Like, don't necessarily just take what they said and say, that's exactly what I have to do in the future. Take the feedback, but also give yourself feedback. How are you going to interpret that? How are you going to mold it into what you do next time, or how you will take that situation in the future? That's not easy, right? Is engaging in that self-assessment. We're hard on ourselves when we really get into it. So I think that's important, though, in order to really make sure that you take in feedback properly.
I think that's such an important point. And I know certainly in my 15 years in my banking career, you know, there was feedback that I got that I went through that first, like manage my response and then show empathy. And then I wasn't always really good at the last part, which is actually engage in, as you're saying, that self-assessment, because it's also one person's opinion. So there's my responsibility in that to understand that a little bit better. And
great point.
Now, obviously, when I'm coaching clients, you know, whether it's, you know, top leadership or people more in a group level at the beginning of their career, one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that it doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to define you. And that piece that you've just said in the time machine of the final bit of engage in that self-assessment is going to help it not just define who you are because of one thing that one person said. And that for me is
so true.
So important.
True.
I wonder now on the other side of things, because the second part of your, it's a nice little acronym actually, MEA, is empathy, right? Because there's two people in that conversation. And now obviously you're on the other side of it in terms of giving feedback. You're obviously still receiving feedback. But what insights do you have now as a manager, Michael, that you can share around the challenges maybe that management might have around the topic of feedback and particularly giving it?
Oh, that's a really good question too. We all talk about this concept of a feedback sandwich, right? And it's like, I hate the stupid feedback sandwich, but we all know it, right? It's deliver something nice to the person, then deliver the blow, and then deliver the action item, right? Which at its core, okay, we kind of agree with that, but sometimes it can come off as a bit disingenuous, right? So it's about providing feedback at the right moments and the right time and for the right reasons. Your team or the people you're providing feedback to will respect when you're providing feedback, is at least my experience. That also means that you really have to incorporate the timing and the delivery of your feedback, because if it's not within my team and they don't understand how and when I deliver feedback, I'm not just going to go to Joe Schmo, whoever Joe Schmo is, and say, hey, I observed this, so I'm going to give you feedback. Well, they have no context. They have no relationship with me. And so that type of context is really important. And deciding when to deliver feedback is a really difficult decision that you have to make. The longer you wait to give feedback to somebody, the less impactful it's going to be, and the more stunned or concerned that particular receiver of that feedback is going to be. Because, okay, why did you wait 6 weeks to provide that feedback? There are times where there are things of feedback that you do wait, right? Reviews, end of years, mid-years, all those things. Those aren't critical feedback items usually, right? If there's something you've got to get out there, you get it out there. You have that honest, upfront, and rational conversation, at least from my experience. And feedback can feed forward, right? It's like, what are you going to do in the future? What would I recommend you to do in the future? It's not always feedback, right? Let's talk feed forward and how we can take the situation and either avoid it or do better next time.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of setting the context and not waiting for, traditionally in our organizations, it's very much this will happen at this time of year and that time of year. And it's just not how we are designed to be as human beings. So I think that's so important. And I know that you said you're delivering it in a rational way. Is there something you have to do as a manager? Because, we mentioned the emotional response of kind of defensiveness when you're receiving it. As a manager, is there a process that you go through to manage your emotions ahead of that as well? Because maybe someone's really disappointed you or kind of made you annoyed or whatever it is. Is there an emotional part of that? Is the chimp going there for you now as a manager?
Absolutely. And so I think the one thing too is never send a reactive email. Always, if you are furiously type, and this is just for all the interns, if I can pass one lesson from this diatribe today, that this may be for you. I just don't send the furious email, right? Let it sit, walk away, even wait till tomorrow, because we have a tendency to react very quickly to something that's on your mind. It's bothering you. It's agitating you. Even positive feedback can go this way, right? Where you're like, oh my God, I'm so excited to say something. Let me immediately provide feedback. It might not be the right time, right? So soak in the response that you would have wanted to receive yourself. Nobody likes surprises. So make sure you set the context properly. If, hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes? And, really make sure you provide some insight as to why this is even happening.
And do
it in the right setting.
And forget the sandwich. Oh, that sandwich.
Forget the sandwich.
Oh,
we all love sandwiches, but
never. You'll never find that in one of my coaching programs ever. Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing all of those insights. I would love to finish with our lightning round to see a little bit more under the skin of Michael Cornacchio. So, are you ready?
Let's see if I'm caffeinated enough.
All right. What is your favorite word?
Opine.
Oh, I like it. And what is your...
It's such an underused word.
It is. I'm going to try and use it in the next day or so. What is your go-to takeout order?
Chipotle.
Another good Mexican. And if you could choose just one book or maybe a TED talk that you wish everybody would read or watch, what would it be?
Oh, goodness. Just because we've talked about it, and this whole concept of the chimp paradox, it's great for new hires. It's great for new people in organizations, especially big ones.
Brilliant. And if you had one superpower, Michael, what would it be?
Oh, teleportation. What were we talking about earlier? Traffic, right? I hate it. Living in New York or outside of New York. Teleportation. Be anywhere where I want, whenever I want.
Just zip over. I love it. And what sound or noise do you love?
The ocean.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
That's an easy one.
And obviously you love what you do, but what profession other than your own would you love to attempt?
Sports commentary or reporting. I would have loved that. I blew that. I missed that opportunity, man. That would have been great.
Let's hear your best sports commentating voice for the last question, which is, if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be?
Oh, if I could have a billboard with anything on it, it would be the winning lottery numbers that only I could see. And then I'm out.
And you're out. Dare to dream.
Love AIG. I love AIG.
Of course. But actually, then you'd be sports commentating. You'd have all of that money and you'd be able to do exactly that. I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Michael.
It's been a pleasure.
And if people want to connect with you, can they find you on LinkedIn? How's the best way to connect?
Absolutely.
Great.
LinkedIn, email me. You guys are part of the org now. Reach out. We've done a lot with the interns in the past. Doesn't matter if you're in property, general insurance, who cares? Just reach out. Don't hesitate to ask any questions.
Amazing. He likes a good lightning round, so ask those questions. Michael, thank you so much for your time today. Have a super day there in New York.
Thank you so much.